All right, welcome to the Lexington and Concord Podcast. We are your hosts, Austin and Alexander, and we've got a couple of topics that we're getting into the holiday season, and the holiday time is always a good time if you're a gun person because there's so many iconic holiday films out there.
In America, the holidays signal violence, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, it starts with Home Alone, right? As violent as that can be.
that's true.
But then, Lethal
There,
Weapon,
there is a
Die
Tommy gun in
There is.
Home Alone.
There is
So
a Tommy gun in Home Alone. And, that's not even getting to the micro machines and all the other things that they do to the poor robbers. Prison time for them must have been easy time compared to
yeah, I
that house.
suppose.
And honestly, that house is kind of is a great indicator of what's like just driving through Chicago.
R.I.P. though, yeah, it's in Chicago,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not a great gun area. Another great film. Obviously, the low hanging fruit is Die Hard. Like
Of course.
everybody knows, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. The debate is over. Close the casket. But let's talk about what is your favorite gun from Die Hard.
Ooh, favorite gun from Die Hard. I won't go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the P7. That's kind of low-hanging fruit to me. It's actually what it actually is versus what it's pretending to be. The H&K 94, which is standing in for the MP5 because they didn't have MP5, so they just took these 94s and dressed them up to try to make them look like it. Really, the only difference is more metal versus polymers, if I'm correct on that. But the fact that
No, they don't have a flapper magazine release.
well, I guess there's that.
They
There's
were
a few
cut
things.
down barrels.
But the fact that they were just standing in for MP5s was kind of cool. It's honestly, you can't really find the 94s. I went and looked for them. They're really not out there for sale anymore.
I would have to say there's several that are. I'm looking at the list right now.
If you
There's
say
several.
the Beretta M9, which
No, I'm not
they
going to
would
say
not
the
have
Beretta
had
M9.
actually in
No,
New York City.
well, yes, that's true. But interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know this. I'm going to use this as a segue. Well, actually, no. We'll talk about the Beretta M9 in a second.
Okay, come back to that.
The first one that I find interesting, I did a video on this years ago on the guns of Die Hard because we happen to have a bunch at the warehouse at the place where I work, which we
One
can't
of your
mention.
first videos, isn't
One
it?
of my first videos. I think it did pretty well as well. But
It's the hair.
we had the hair. We had I think one of the cool ones was the Walther, not a P3, P5, the Walther P5.
Oh yeah, I forgot that that's in there
So
actually.
kind of a little bit of an upgrade to the Walther P1, which is basically a P38, the post-Nazi P38.
Aluminum framed. And
Very, very cool. And the P5 had kind of the closed slide. It looks a little bit different. It makes a very, very brief. I think when they run into the boardroom and John McClane's on his back under the table, he ends up shooting the guy under the table.
Yeah.
That's the only time that you see the P5. Very cool. The other one, dude, there's so many. But I'm gonna wait real quick.
Well,
There's
you
two.
gotta also. Despite there are many inaccuracies, obviously throughout the movie, that's fine. We don't care. The fact that Hans Gruber is a German guy, they went out and found German guns to put into
They
the
did.
movie. So someone did take time to go. If this is a German group,
German and
what would they have?
Austrian guns. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of German guns, but there's two Austrian
There are
guns.
two Austrian guns in there.
Everybody knows the AUG. And I think that was an iconic moment for the AUG because like bullpups,
It was kind of its coming out moment.
it wasn't a really big thing. And it's like, what is this rifle that this dude has? Crazy cool. And it's just iconic that when he takes all the pieces out of the bag and he takes the barrel and he runs into the
In some
receiver.
ways, it kind of becomes a character in the movie because they show that scene, right, of him assembling it as a callback to what will come later when Carl comes out of the rubble, right? And
Isn't Carl his brother?
or
Gets killed?
whatever, whoever. But he comes out of the rubble, right, and is shooting it in the air. And then you have that iconic moment of the guy eating the Twinkie that rises. He's just a little Smith & Wesson shooter and
Yeah.
takes care of it.
I mean, God bless the Twinkie. What
yeah.
a great American invention. But so obviously the Steyr AUG, super cool. Aussie's still using that today. A great cool rifle in
not
it.
the
No,
Aussies.
the Aussies. It's the service rifle for the
that's
Aussies.
true. I forgot about that.
Austrians as well. But the other Austrian gun, also made by Steyr. Do you know it? Can you name it in the movie?
I honestly don't remember. It's been a while since I went through the individual firearms in the movie.
The sniper rifle in the helicopter
Oh yes,
is an SG-69.
SG-69.
169? 669? I don't remember. It's something 69. That's the only number that we need to remember.
That is it.
If you know
folks.
what I'm saying. Let me look it up.
Ask your parents about that.
Yeah, or your priest. Whatever.
That's always that's a whole another story. But it's always good to ask the priest questions when it comes to things like.
I believe it's a SG-69.
I just gotta make a mention of that particular scene where it does
SSG-69.
when it makes that appearance. They're flying the helicopters in. They go up. There's the big explosion obviously on the rooftop. That was all done practically. They actually got a permit.
Yeah, and they won't let anybody do it after that.
No, because there were so
many
many noise complaints afterwards. They did blow up the top of that building. That building was under construction at the time. That is actually the Fox Studios building in Los Angeles. So like the scenes where you see John McClane fight in those under construction areas, that was real construction sets that they were filming this in. Most of the building was not occupied at the time, so they filmed it live. I mean, when you think of today's world where everything's CGI, and you go, this actually holds up really well. The only thing that's not practical necessarily, or at least I should say to scale, is they added in, obviously, the helicopter coming down and blowing up. That's a model that they blew up. They didn't do a real helicopter that way, but everything else is practical.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but
Can you just imagine being that helicopter pilot, though, flying low in through the cities of Los Angeles? He's probably a non-vet, having some flashbacks, good time.
Yeah, but let's use this as a segue to another great Christmas movie. So, in the movie, there's John McClane.
There's John McClane.
John McClane is using a Beretta 92
Yes.
F.
It is.
It is the Beretta 92
It's
F.
pre-FS, if I remember.
It's pre-FS, which is interesting because I just want to make sure that I got that right. It is an F, right? Or is it an S? It's an F. So, it's interesting. So, the 92F, and I believe the F stood for federale, whatever they... in Italian, whatever it is, because it was a federal contract handgun that the United States did adopt in 1986. Mm-hmm. And, prior to them adopting it, they take in the 92F and they go through all of these kind of tests. It goes to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and then there's some issues. The slide ends up breaking because they had some out-of-spec ammunition that they were shooting, which caused some concerns with the United States. So they basically went back to Beretta with all of this information, and they go, hey, your slides are faulty, even though they did what they were supposed to do. It was the out-of-spec ammunition. You need to create something stronger. So in comes the FS. So the one in the movie is actually an F, not an FS. The interesting thing about this, though,
when you think about it,
yeah,
87-ish, I think.
The interesting thing about the F is that it's classic United States military. It is. They go in, they make this decision. This isn't strong enough. You got to go fix these handguns, and I believe Beretta sued the United States Army for that. They ended up winning the lawsuit, and the U.S. was on the hook for all of the fixes for something that wasn't really a problem, but they had to update tooling, and I think they even had to pay for some other contracts that weren't theirs for upgrades. But anyways, side story, doesn't matter. In the movie, 92F, and it was actually modified for Bruce Willis because he was left-handed. Mm-hmm. However, that same gun would show up a few years later in another iconic movie. Do you know what that movie is?
This isn't Lethal Weapon,
It's in Lethal Weapon.
I was
it's
going to say,
Mel
Gibson's gun. It's his actual
gun in Lethal Weapon.
Which is somewhat common in Hollywood. Most people don't know about it. So Die Hard comes out in 87. Double check me. I'm pretty sure it's 1987 is when Die Hard comes out.
Die Hard came out in 88.
Excuse me, 88. Well, the year before that was Predator, right? And that minigun shows up later in Terminator 2. They just recycle these props over and over and over again.
Actually, Lethal Weapon was first, so I was wrong.
So they modified.
It was Lethal Weapon first, and then it was Die Hard. So in the scene where John McClane's under the table and he's shooting through the table, he actually he's shooting blanks. He's not wearing hearing protection.
He went deaf in one
He
ear.
went deaf in one ear. So the key to
Should've had a
remember
suppressor.
here, kids, is you're supposed to have a suppressor.
And Hans Gruber did
Always
the
have a
stupid thing
suppressor.
where he took his suppressor off
Yeah.
for no reason.
Keep the suppressor on, Hans.
But despite the fact it goes inside the barrel, that's a whole thing. It's also a very big
What are you doing, Hans?
misnomer.
Nobody's wearing hearing protection, Hans.
Well, it didn't really matter for Mr. Nakatomi, but
Yeah,
that's kind of beside the point.
you know,
He built that beautiful building.
It's
and
just
and then he only got
relationships
one Christmas party.
between it really set back relationships between the Japanese and the Germans, which hasn't exactly been the best thing in the world.
for the world.
Not
But, I mean,
not the best support, you know.
Yeah. But
Anyways,
that the great Christmas movie. Most people forget that the Lethal Weapon
Lethal
series
Weapon is
started as a Christmas movie.
Christmas time frame.
Right.
Also a great gun movie. I mean,
Lots of great
the
guns.
guns in there are just
And Gary Busey
crazy
as the
cool.
bad
I mean,
guy was
Gary
awesome.
Busey. It's
Awesome.
just a gem of a person. Like,
You kind of
I want, if I die before Gary Busey dies, I want him to do my funeral and just talk about buttered sausage.
I got to say though that he is a bad guy in that movie that you almost halfway root for at times.
I don't know what movie you watched. I never once rooted for him.
Oh, I don't know. He just had the cool factor.
No.
You know.
He had the creepy, like, I'm going to
Well,
light my
He
harm on
kind of
fire.
got pigeonholed in that because I mean that's going like Under Siege. Of course, that was maybe the first time you saw a cross-dresser on TV, but you know, good times.
Anyways,
That's a real big
iconic movie heroes, though, because you got to think you have Bruce Willis, you have Mel Gibson,
Don't forget Danny Glover.
Danny Glover, incredible.
He's too old for this, you know. stuff.
Too old for this in 1987. Super too old for it now. But that was kind of cool too to see you have this kind of addressed in a movie, this clash between the old school cop who's rocking the 6-shooter. I've got all the power. I only need 6 shots. And then the young gun who comes in with that underpowered 9mm, which
It would
participated in a lot of more
I
wars
mean, it's
than
kind of a
38.
side note here, but it does kind of foreshadow what the New York Police Department would do just 4 years later. Now, they did not adopt the Brother M9. They adopted the Glock 17. They actually, at the time the movie came out, were still predominantly 6-shooters. But
Yeah.
it would actually be a big foreshadow of what was to come. They just
Well,
got the movie.
Lethal Weapon was L.A.
Yeah, but remember, no, I meant Die Hard.
Well, sure.
Because he comes from New York out there.
But, I mean, just, it was an interesting time. Like, we don't really think that much about it. Revolver's very much an American thing. Semi-automatics really took off, I feel like, a little bit more in Europe.
They did.
A lot quicker than they took off in the United States.
Which is weird when you consider that we were the ones to mass produce the 1911 for military use earlier than most people, that forced it into service, like a semi-automatic into
That's
service.
true, but, I think there were
just-
more semi-automatic European.
There was,
Like, you had, the Steyr Hahn 1912. You had the
Yeah.
Luger.
obviously the C-96 Bolo.
Yeah, the C-93 board chart. I mean, there were just so many
But
semi-automatic.
we chose one and had a standard issue, but for whatever reason.
FN, it was like
Yeah.
in the 1910s, it was like the FN 1908, the 1909, 1910,
which
1911, 1912.
really the Colt 1903 kind of falls into that a little bit.
Yeah, have the hammer, the pocket hammerless.
Yes.
I mean, there were so many semi-automatic firearms, but there was just
It's just-
the U.S. was holding on. There's two unique things that I feel like the U.S. really hung on to, and number one is revolvers. I feel like we held on to revolvers for a really long time. Still kind of do.
Yep.
It's very much a thing. A lot of people still rock the wheel gun. And the other thing is lever action. Like, really nowhere else in the world was lever action a big thing. There's, the Russians bought the 1895 for a little while, but,
they came
it wasn't.
to America to do that. There wasn't a
Right.
European manufacturer. They're like, Steyr, we need this gun. They went to Winchester. It was like, we need a repeating rifle. And as far as I'm aware, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not aware of any other European nation that did
No,
anything
I think there were
heavy.
some.
The Russians were the heaviest into lever action.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
then
I think
that's
there
not
were some
even-
minor ones, but yeah, I mean, really not something that was super popular.
I mean, the Gewehr 88 was
Yeah, I mean the Mauser action in general like took over
The world.
really took over the world around the same time. Like lever actions were kind of starting to come out 60s and 70s, and you got to think like I think it was
He's
the
talking about
Paul
the 1860s
Mauser,
there for the
yeah,
kids.
the Paul Mauser needle rifle was the first like Mauser action, right? And that comes out in like I think 1871. So you have that going in, and then iconic rifles like the Lebel in '86. So really, Europe went bolt action really quick, and it took the U.S. a while. It was like this lag, a lot of lever actions all the way up to the late 1800s. There was a little bit of trials with I can't remember the Navy straight pull rifle. I think it was in 6 millimeter, and the name slips my mind, but they had that, and then obviously the big adaptation would be the Craig Jorgensen, which was a Norwegian rifle, not an American rifle.
Nope, but it was produced, licensed to Springfield Armory.
But a Norwegian design that made its way here. Interestingly enough, very similar magazine here on the Johnson rifle.
That is true.
But yeah, the U.S. with the bolt action really wasn't until the 1903 that the fun fact about the 1903 that a lot of people don't know, and I love telling people this. Every country in the 1900s, early 1900s, had a Mauser action, right? You have Spanish Mauser, you've got the Argentinian, the Chilean Mauser, which pretty much are all made by the Germans, right?
Yeah, low Berlin.
But you have all these Mausers really coming out, even the Arisaka Mauser, right? There's a Swedish Mauser over here somewhere up there. So you have just every country making a Mauser. A lot of people don't know, the Americans also made a Mauser. It was called the 1903. It was a Mauser action. The United States got sued for it, in fact, and they were paying
royalties all the way
royalties through. They ended before World War I.
But it is not the only thing though that we were paying royalties to the Germans for. It was also the Spitzer cartridge. We got sued for that. So I will say this: the most American thing I can think of is another country sue our country, and then we honor the lawsuit. If you reverse it and we're like, wow, the Germans ripped us off on this action, and we sued them in, let's say, an American court, and we win, do you think the Germans would pay us?
I don't know. Probably not now. Yeah. Definitely not now. But, so a lot of people don't know in the 1903, too. It's the 1903, and the original cartridge was 30-03, which was a blunt nose cartridge. And then in 1906, you had the introduction of the Spitzer cartridge. Spitzer means pointy.
And the aught at the end, and I have had this question in the shop. Why is it not 30-06, like we say 223 or whatever? Why is it 06, 30-06? It's like, because that's an old way people used to say the date. So it would be 1906. That meant 1906. If you ever watch Shawshank Redemption, Red says this. And I think it was in 03 I came to Shawshank. That's just a very period correct actual way of saying a date. It's just a reference to the date that cartridge was updated.
Yeah, so 30-06 still prominent today? Still a prominent cartridge
probably still
today?
takes more deer than almost any other cartridge.
Nah, I think 30-30 takes more deer. Well, 30-30 at least shoots at more deer than anything.
Yeah, I was going to say.
The cartridge that takes the most deer in the world, I think, personally, because of Europe, is 6.5 Swede.
Well,
I think 6.5 Swede is still, which is basically like as 30-06 is to 308, 6.5 Swede is to 6.5 Creedmoor, but we're not going to get into that. That's a whole diatribe that we could get into.
We have a tendency to be a little bit behind on some of that stuff at times.
Well, everything in the gun world is cyclical.
It is.
Right? Like everything kind of comes around, goes around, which brings me up to our next subject, which I find super interesting, and the reason that I put out the PM63 and the VZ61, which these are real machine guns, by the way, here at the 2FXC Tactical Gun Range Gun Shop. You can come rent them and shoot them.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. These are things out of our collection.
The Johnson rifle, not so much, I'm afraid. But
yeah, you can't. I mean, this is in our collection, but
yes.
you don't get to shoot it.
Yes.
You have to be very special friends with us if you get to shoot this. But with both of these, we wanted to talk a little bit about our favorite gun concepts and how things are cyclical. And one of my favorite gun concepts that you can see here really took off in the East and didn't really take off in the West for a long time, especially during the Cold War, dating all the way back. We go all the way back to World War I. We go back to that that older period, and we see this idea of the machine pistol. And I think like the 1912 Schnellfire really comes to
Don't forget
mind.
the Red Nines.
Yeah, but there wasn't a machine gun. The Schnellfire was the machine
Yeah.
gun version.
Well, they did.
So the idea that we have
And they also did something too that we really haven't seen until the last 5 years. What is the one thing that, like, say, your Lugers and these guys have that your average pistol does not? They have stocks, and yes, the Luger.
No, you're taking me away here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Getting ahead of schedule.
The machine pistol, the shoulderable pistol,
Okay, shoulder
was a thing early on, World War I. I mean, you see, like I said, you see things like the broom handle, the Schnellfire being the full auto version, but the real idea of a machine pistol, right? MP, or not MP, MP machine pistol. And we come up to things like the MP5, right? So there's the MP5 SD back there on the wall, or the AP5 SD, whatever. And the MP being machine pistol, that's not really a machine pistol. That's a submachine gun, in that it's a smaller, it's not shooting a rifle caliber, stuff like that. But that's not something that you would carry on your hip.
Right.
The idea that you would have a handgun that you carried on your hip that had capabilities that you could put 3 points of contact on. And while there were some things like that, you would have even the Browning High Power, which had stocks during World War II. There were some cool things that were going on.
Stocks were very common on pistols.
Very common on pistols. And then all of a sudden kind of disappears. And then in the 60s, we see things like this. This is a legitimate pistol that you would carry like a pistol on your hip. Carry it like a pistol on your hip, and then you can quick deploy the stock. You have 3 points of contact.
Do you think in the United States, because you're right, when you look back to like World War I, you see a lot of handguns. In fact, most of them accepted the stock option. There was a stock option,
Yeah.
At least in Europe. In the United States, you think about all those GIs coming back, right, that saw that, and a lot of them brought the stuff back. You see it for sale, right? Do you think that the National Firearms Act is one of the reasons why that just never became a thing in the United States? Despite the fact, if you were to buy a Luger right now with the stock or a Bolo, the ATF has kind of just overlooked those and it looks at them.
No, they're grandfathered in.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so that those aren't considered a SBR, even though they don't have pistol braces. That's a whole nother subject.
So if we want to grab a word out of the air, it's a buzzword that's kind of going around right now. It's pretty popular. A lot of people are talking about it. It's very topical. It's kind of trendy. And we want to take that word and we want to apply that to the National Firearms Act. That's retarded.
That is fair.
Just an absolutely idiotic bill that was passed. And ultimately the NFA was passed because the United States government decided to take drinking away from all of the. Well, no. Listen, this is my thought process here.
To be fair, it was passed.
It was passed after, but it was because of the crime syndicates that were created during
I was going to
Prohibition.
say, God forbid that I am going to defend the U.S. government here, and you can smash those thumbs down all you want. I have to say, when it comes to Prohibition, we're speaking of Prohibition here. It was ratified via ballot measures through through 3/4 of the states at the time. So the people who passed that voted for it. Now they got what they wanted, good and hard. It turns out it doesn't really do what you want it to do. And I mean, we can all be sympathetic to the people getting beat by alcoholic individuals, but it turns out it made that far worse, actually.
You're talking about not the NFA. You're
I'm talking about the Prohibition. So when
Prohibition.
I used to say the NFA is failed government policy in response to failed government policy.
Yeah.
But you could make an argument, and someone brought this up to me. It's like you could make the argument Prohibition really wasn't on the government. It was on the people because they voted for it. Fair, but that doesn't give the excuse for the government to turn around and
take rights away from people.
And I said this the other day, and I got corrected by a customer, and they're correct. I was like, the NFA is virtually irrelevant now in terms of modern technology.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But we're talking
Absolutely.
about stocks on pistols from the 1900s, 1800s. It was technically irrelevant the moment it was written. Like, the fact that firearm advancement, it was happening in real time. And we will look at it and say, man, we've advanced so fast in such a short period of time. Well, just 40 years before that, they didn't have semi-autos. It was advancing crazy fast. I mean, they were going from paper cartridges. The people who wrote and passed that bill in their lifetime are using paper cartridges. And all of a sudden, they're talking about banning fully automatic self-loading rifles.
So this brings up a really good point, actually, because I'm talking about these machine pistols,
Yes.
right? So one of my favorite concepts. And we see this coming back with things like the Flux, right? So,
Flux,
so
right.
all of a sudden we're getting into, and I'm a huge believer. I believe firmly that like law enforcement agencies
Yes.
should be getting Fluxes because when you can add points of contact, you can add accuracy. And handguns are one of the hardest things to shoot accurately. I think.
Especially in today's liability.
Yeah, and how
ridden-
quickly you can deploy those. Like, absolutely, we should be pushing these out to law enforcement. We should be pushing these out to, like, contractors, whatever it is, like base security. Everybody should be rocking these Fluxes, should be rocking these modular things, right? But you bring up a really good point. Did the NFA hamper basically the production and the, what would you call it, like popularity of certain things?
I think that's fair. I also think it hampered the culture, too.
But let me finish my thought here, because I think you're onto something. We're getting into a season here where that $200 tax stamp is finally going to go away. And without the $200 tax stamp, according to the Supreme Court, and I am citing the Supreme Court on this, not me,
1937.
not my opinion here, but according to the Supreme Court, if there's no tax, then there is no NFA. But hopefully that gets sorted out by our Supreme Court. Currently, however, we're getting to a point where we don't have that $200 tax stamp, and I've been talking to a lot of folks in the industry, and I'm like, where do you see things going? Where do you see things progressing? And a lot of people are like, I really think integrally suppressed firearms are going to just explode because now all of a sudden you don't have to worry about that extra tax stamp, and hopefully we're getting to the deregulation of suppressors. But if you think about it, right, suppressor, car muffler, comes from the same idea.
Actually,
same
same
time
guy.
frame, same guy. So
Thank
that
New York City for the car muffler, by the way.
that goes through, and we all now today, if a car drives by without a car muffler, we're like, you know what, screw that guy.
Actually, it's literally a ticketable offense in most states.
Right. So you think about that now. Every car has a car muffler. I think there's going to be a point, and I think that it's been hampered. Like the suppressor has been around for well over 100 years. I think it's been hampered by the NFA because really in the world we live in today, the United States drives most firearms things, with the U.S. market being the largest market out there. I think we're going to see integrated suppressed firearms pop up and become more and more popular just because it's just natural. It makes the shooting experience better, just like a stock on a pistol makes. In fact, you could make an argument: stock on a pistol makes a pistol less dangerous because the person and the user is going to be more accurate.
I'll say that too. The first person to make an integrally suppressed pistol wins.
Oh, I mean, those do exist.
I'm saying,
What's
but like
the,
makes it common. So like my thing is, this is one place where I do think Europe is ahead of the United States in firearms. It's probably almost the only time I'm going to say that, and that's just because
is it the Maxim 9?
the Maxim 9, yes.
was
and there
that was
was
pretty recent.
Yeah, there was, but I think you're gonna, like you said, that's really the only option. That's going to end up the person that can mass produce that on a, and no offense to Maxim, love Maxim, what they do on a more ergonomical level where the average person can integrate to that wins. And Europe is well ahead of this, where most of their guns do come with suppressors because it's considered courteous, and it's actually less about your hearing; it's more about everyone around you, which is weird to think about. Yes, I envision a day now that the tax stamp is going to zero, and there is a strong argument that at least the items that are going to $0 tax stamps. We're not speaking of machine guns, unfortunately, like these, or destructive devices, at least in the current era. If they come off the National Firearms Act, I could totally see an era where maybe even like hunting regulations is going to require you to have a suppressor.
Which it should. Like I just did a review on a Yankee Hill Victra 12, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody, and they were just like, what is the point? I was like, I get, suppressing a rifle. I get suppressing a handgun. I don't understand suppressing a shotgun. And I was like, how many people, when they go duck hunting in a party? You're in a blind with multiple people. Nobody's wearing hearing protection because we want to hear our surroundings. Turkey hunting, kind of need to hear what's going on. Shooting 3.5-inch shells, which are pretty serious. And again, turkey hunting is something people typically do together in a group. And to prevent hearing damage, to really protect the people who are there and to not disturb the wildlife, like to help bring down that noise pollution. It's just insane to me that it's taken us this long to basically admit as a country that it's not an assassin's weapon, it's or accessory, that
Right.
it's a legitimate safety device.
I think that, speaking, you were saying not disturb the wildlife, but when you think about the fact that, let's just take us here in southern Minnesota, for instance, we are more populated than, say, northern Minnesota. I would like to go hunt turkeys, outside in somebody's yard, and they give me permission, and it's in a legal area I can do so. There are, or at least the odds are great that there's going to be a house not far away. So in order to keep that noise down for the neighborhood too is just, again, a courteous thing to do. And the thing that no one talks about suppressors too, especially when you think about turkeys, you're talking about 3.5-inch shells. There's a lot of kick to turkey loads. They're magnum loads, typically speaking.
You bring down that recoil.
Bring that recoil down, and you're going to open up that world to people who otherwise couldn't enjoy it or don't do it because they're nervous about it. And we were just literally talking about this the other day. It's a real problem in the United States that we are seeing hunting numbers drop, especially up here in terms of people actually entering the hunting field. And while you say, I hear the animal rights activists and PETA out there just clapping the hands. It's like the problem
Number one people for conservation.
I'm like, they're going to end up overrunning everything. I mean, we could drive through Minneapolis right now, and there's turkeys everywhere, and you can't do anything about them, and they destroy stuff. It's like because they have no natural predators in downtown Minneapolis.
I actually was just we're getting off subject here, but like
there are
hunting,
predators in Minneapolis, but not turkeys.
You know what they say in Minneapolis? If you thought you heard fireworks, you didn't.
Nope.
The land where it is illegal to buy flavored tobacco, God forbid that kids get, or flavored nicotine products in general. God forbid that we encourage kids or that kids get addicted because their tobacco or their
watermelon flavored
smells like strawberries.
Yeah.
But if I need free clean needles, I could just hit up the health department and they got me down for that, or condoms or lube or anything like that.
There's also not a single gun shop in Minneapolis that was banned as an ordinance.
Great state, just wonderful state, wonderful city as well. But anyways, getting back to subject, I was just listening to a Steve Rinella podcast, and he was talking about like hunting regulations and how there's like 0 cases, there's no studies about CWD being transmitted from deers to humans, yet there's all this regulation, like don't even like touch a deer with CWD, and he's like, that's not even, and it's like it's discouraging.
I asked a DNR officer here the other day because we became certified hunter safety instructors here at 2F me and a couple of the guys that work here. I was like, CWD is not something you hear about a lot in the South, and it's also not. I was like, historically speaking, has this been the problem? No. And his answer was no, it's a relatively new thing. I'm like, where did it come from? And I think overpopulation has to be considered. I mean, I
don't know. There's overpopulation in the South too.
Like, but I'm just saying,
Tennessee
I just like,
control.
it's not something that, like you said, there's 0 cases. And if it did exist for all time, well, there was no testing kits back in, 1788 when the natives were going around shooting these things.
I think that getting back to the gun side of this too.
We should do a whole hunting thing.
We should do a whole hunting thing. Well, I was about to say, I don't think that the gun industry gets enough credit to the hunting lobby for the impact that they have on firearms. I think there's a lot of really cool innovations that come out from hunting, especially calibers, incredible calibers.
A lot of our precision rifles.
Also,
like that.
You think about hollow points defensive rounds, and a lot of that stuff comes out of research done for hunting rounds. So that there's a lot that goes on there that I think is super cool, and we don't give enough credit, I think, to the
and that's true for accessories. I mean, a lot of like the thermals and stuff. You see that even like the military is using. Hunting was one of the big proving grounds for that, where they take it out to hunters, and that's your testing ground.
Yeah, I kind of think it's vice versa. I think a lot of stuff from the military just kind of finds its way to hunters just because, it's good kit. But yeah, very much. There's a lot of really cool things that the hunting community brings to the gun table. Because I think like I'm a modern day Second Amendment constitutionalist. I hate certain organizations that I'm not going to name that are out there. And because I think that they're full of FUDs, and sometimes I can just generalize like the hunting community. Like there's a bunch of people who only care about their hunting rifles, and there are, but there are a lot of really solid gun people who are hunters as well. And it's just super. It's super. I think underappreciated in a lot of ways.
I do think if there's one plug I would put in there for that is, and I'm only going to speak for the state of Minnesota here. I mean, we do have quite a bit of hunters here in the state of Minnesota. It is a part of our culture here, in the state.
And it's across the aisle thing. Like,
yeah, but only about 15% of registered hunters actually vote in the state of Minnesota,
Yeah.
And it's just that is mind-boggling to me when you consider the complaints about rifle zones and all that.
We're not going to get into the
no,
power of voting.
I'm just saying, like, it's just odd when you say
Yeah, for sure.
it's
Absolutely.
it's not to tell you to vote one way or the other. Vote your conscience as always. It's just like.
Let's talk a little bit, though. Speaking of voting, let's talk a little bit about laws, OG laws. We've already touched on this a little bit with the NFA, but the Second Amendment specifically, we were talking about some movies that came out in 1988. So Lethal Weapon comes out in 1988, right? Really iconic American film. Cowboy, yippee-ki-yay, Bruce Willis out there shooting up all these East German terrorists. Or terrorists from origins that we don't really know. But
Not really
another key thing came out in 1988. It was legislation, and it was not in the United States. Do you know what it was?
Not in the United States. I really don't know
It was the ban of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns in Britain,
and then,
followed a few years by the ban of handguns.
It was 93, I think, was the ban of handguns.
I think it was 97. I don't know. I'd have to look.
It was in the 90s.
It was in the 90s. So you have the ban of semi-automatic rifles and semi-automatic shotguns, and you have the ban of handguns. And the reason I bring this up is we talk a lot about the Second Amendment. Obviously here, Lexington and Concord Podcast and the 2F by C Tactical Range, historical ties. So Lexington and Concord being really, really important. There's no United States without Lexington and Concord. British were coming to seize the powder and the cannons of the colonists. We've talked about that before.
What is it with British seizing guns?
I don't know. They have a thing for it, for sure.
Really
but
do.
you know, it's. I'm not going to say that because like Britain has a very rich gun culture, and unfortunately, like their government has just completely tyrannized the whole gun culture that Britain had. Britain had some really cool. I mean, like the short, Lee Enfield, incredible rifle. One of the first countries we were talking about bullpups earlier, one of the first countries to put a bullpup forward for service. Technically, it was adopted. It ultimately got scratched by Winston Churchill because the FAL was unofficially adopted by the U.S. We're not going to get into that today. But there's a lot of really rich history. The British, of course, invented the .276 British cartridge, the .280 British is what it would be called, which I find interesting because the United States shut that whole project down in the 1950s just to come around in 2025, 2024 and be like, hey, we have this new cartridge called .277 Fury that we're going to rock with.
I will say,
cyclical.
Just props to say, because someone read a book.
They
were like, hey,
it's important to read books.
They're like, that's cool. Let's see what we can do with that. And props to you for that. We won't get into the P320. You should have read a book on that.
But ultimately, we get to a point here where the Second Amendment is discussed, and a lot of people, like I said, we brought up hunting, and now we've gotten a little bit into some of the legislation that's going on. It is super important. The Second Amendment is so important, and it's so easy to go, okay, well, the Second Amendment, I get it. Lexington and Concord, the British march on you to take your guns away. But what is super easy to overlook is we live in 2025, and people in London and in England and Great Britain are getting thrown in prison for things that they say on the internet.
Or just taking a picture with a firearm.
Which is something pretty recent that happened to a gentleman who was in the United States doing a little bit of visiting, goes back home, posts those pictures, and he ends up in jail, assumed guilty until proven innocent. Which is completely wrong. And
Are we gonna
really,
talk about the guy that they let out too for being overly oppressed, or are we not going to mention that?
I mean, look, we don't have enough podcast time to talk
That's
about
fair.
all the things that Great Britain is doing as far as just horrific legislation. And in the United States, our defense, again, we've talked a little bit about hunting. We've talked a little bit about even self-defense, right? So, like, that's something that brings up a lot of people are like, oh, well, there's self-defense. The Second Amendment, it guarantees my right to self-defense. It's like, but it guarantees your right of self-defense against
From what?
who?
Yeah.
Against tyranny. And that's the whole point. We have the First Amendment in the United States, but I will be the first one to tell you, looking at countries like Great Britain, like Ireland,
Canada.
Canada. Oh,
They all
for
have
sure.
a First Amendment, sort of.
That First Amendment gets zapped so quickly
It does.
when there is no Second Amendment to
You got to think of the
protect it.
Second Amendment as the enforcement arm for the First Amendment. I always tell people all the time, the First Amendment is the ideal, right? That is what this country is literally built on.
You fight battles with words.
Right, but
And when you can't
have
fight
to
battles
have-
with words,
you have to have actual muscle to back it up, and that is where the Second Amendment comes in.
and yeah, I think, and we look at countries like Great Britain, right? So we bring this up 1988, 1997. They take these guns away. They have these mandatory buybacks, which is oxymoronic because the government did not sell you your gun, so they're not buying it back from you. They are buying it from you with taxpayer dollars, which costs you money. Ultimately, they're taking your tax money to buy things from you. But we get into other countries like you had mentioned. We see Canada, we see Australia. Australia during COVID, I mean, bad news, right? Like if you had any dissipating opinions on what was the official narrative or went against the official narrative, like you'd find yourself in jail. Obviously, Canada is in this huge fight, and good on Alberta for getting out there and standing up for the rights of Canadians, for fighting for their right to defense. And, this is something that we suffer a lot here in Minnesota. I know we've made fun of Minnesota, or at least I've made fun of Minnesota. Minnesota's a really great state, but the problem is it's railroaded by a big city with big city problems. And you see that a lot in Canada. Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal problems get legislated to provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta, where those issues don't exist, but they try to take people's rights away because of how people are acting in these big cities. And when they do that, ultimately it leaves you up to what Canada, they were seizing people's bank accounts, throwing people in jail for believing certain religions, like all kinds of crazy things that are going on.
Not taking a vaccine mandate.
And here in the United States, like we already kind of see, people all the time will be like, man, like the Second Amendment, there's no need for the Second Amendment and stuff like that. I was like, the need for the Second Amendment is justified by you saying there's no need. Like the second anyone in government says there's no need for the Second Amendment, you have just justified the Second Amendment.
Well, I should be mentioned, and again, not my words, and I'm going to really paraphrase this here. You can go look it up at the George Washington Museum. George Washington felt so strongly about this. He actually mentioned this in his inaugural address to becoming president, that the citizens are not subjects because of arms.
Yep. The only difference between subjects and citizens is firearms ownership, and that's a key.
Can you imagine
tenet.
a president saying that though in an inaugural address today?
I can't imagine a young president. So I mean, we're at the point where it's like
That's fair. I mean, George Washington was a young man when you consider about it.
yeah, when you think about it, like
I
the
mean,
guy wasn't that old.
I think he died in his 50s.
No, I think it's 60s, but still, well younger than what we've been running. Like a great job. Anyways, I just think it's important to address the history of Lexington and Concord is not something to look back at and be like, oh my gosh, like that was great for that time. It absolutely applies to today. It is so important for you to maintain that autonomy, for you to maintain your freedom. Without the Second Amendment, you're in a place where you're just going to get taken advantage of by whoever is in power, and don't ever let go of that. And fight to get, like, we need to fight to get ground back on the Second Amendment. Like we were talking about this yesterday.
So much has been surrendered.
So much has been surrendered, and it's like we just had this creation of the Second Amendment committee or the Second Amendment board.
Civil Rights Committee or something like that.
Right. And like you were like, isn't this exciting? And I basically said, no, it's not. And you were like, well, why not? I was like, because why are we hiring people? Why are we bringing people in and paying them money to sit on a board to ratify something that is already written down in our Constitution?
And then my only pushback is, if we're going to gain ground back, we're going to need some bulldogs in there.
Maybe, but I mean,
I get
as a taxpayer, I'm like, why are we paying people to be in office, in a new created office, when we already have the Second Amendment? It's pretty clear, shall not be infringed.
I agree.
You know,
I was just going to say.
No, I mean, I get your
the sad
point.
State of affairs, though, is like, this is the first time, and this is not me endorsing the way the Trump administration has treated the Second Amendment, because it's been wishy-washy at best.
Yeah, it's 50-50.
It's 50-50, but it's the first time, and this is sad, that the federal government in the United States has officially recognized it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
it's just
insane to think about. Like, they have never actually, and this is going back.
Which, why would they, right? Because the Second Amendment is really the only. I would argue, maybe you could make the argument for the First Amendment a little bit, but the Second Amendment is the only legislation that is pinned down that literally says, if you go too far, your punishment is, people bring up January 6th, how terrible January 6th was. We have this insurrection and stuff like that. And like the whole thing goes on, and I'm sitting there going,
no one died. Well, one person died.
The insurrection, if there was an insurrection, the government oversteps its bounds. The United States has the right, like American citizens have the right, and nay, the duty, to ratify that through the Second Amendment, right? So if there was a real insurrection, it would be a little more serious than people running in and taking pictures.
Was it Thomas Jefferson? No, I think it was John Adams. Maybe it was Samuel Adams. I don't remember which one. Said, the tree of liberty must be refreshed.
Thomas Jefferson. But yeah, with the blood of
tyrants and patriots.
So
I mean, but I was saying, I think what he meant by that was saying that the natural inclination of government always is accumulation of power and
corrupts,
subjugating subjects. That is literally its function, actually, in development. Now, while we can all contend that there is a level of that is necessary to keep anarchy at bay, the problem is there will always be a struggle, right?
And that's the way.
Things, but the Second Amendment is the yin to the yang.
That's kind of the way, though, right? That our government is set up. Is there's supposed to be a struggle, and it's supposed to kind of be like a standoff, like a Mexican standoff, right? Like, hey, you don't go too far, or you're gonna get it. And that's kind of the balance that the U.S. is supposed to have.
I think that's
the people are supposed to have with the government.
I think that's one of the great props that we have to give the founders, 250 years ago next year, which is they understood that the natural inclination of government is the accumulation of power. They were acutely aware of that. Of course, they just fought a whole war on that, right? And they were humble enough to admit to themselves, and this is like impossible to think about in today's terms. They were writing a new government, and in many ways, not saying that was their ultimate goal, because a lot of them it wasn't, but they were putting themselves in positions of power, because the only one to direct this new nation was the very people that are birthing it, right? They were humble enough to admit that we're going to mess this up, so we're going to build in protections from from ourselves that are about to assume these positions.
100%.
Right, and that is... You literally can't think of a moment.
People don't give the founding fathers. I think that we live in an age where we have so much access to information. We have so much access to education, right? And like education in and of itself does not make you a smart person. It's how you apply that education, right? Like, and that ultimately goes to what I would call wisdom, right? You have to have wisdom on where that goes. And like, I could just know a bunch of facts. That doesn't make me a super well-rounded, smart person if I don't know how to implement those facts correctly. And I think that because we have so much access to information, it's almost made us stupider, because we don't have to think for ourselves.
Sure.
We just have these institutions where we have devices think for us. We're to the point where we run into a problem. We're like, AI, fix it, and it's like in 1783, when we're at a standstill over the Civil Rights Act, or not Civil Rights Act, over the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. there's no chat GPT to be like, hey, what should we do to, make all this better? And we don't give them enough credit for the wisdom and the knowledge that
I
they
think
have.
we should also take the moment to give them credit for the accumulation of that wisdom, because like Alex just said here, and this is something that honestly didn't really occur to me until he said it. We here can, if I'm curious about a subject, I can go find that subject. These guys are writing a constitution, the birth of the nation, citing tenets of, yes, English common law, but most of our constitution is actually from the Roman era. And the fact that they found a way to learn about it, which is not easy, by the way, in the 1700s. We're talking about physical books. Where do you go? We say libraries. There wasn't a whole lot of libraries around for you to go in the 1700s. So the fact that they could find a way to actually learn the stuff to even get to the application is really amazing.
And the sad thing is, right, like 1783, 1784, if you were to go to somebody and you were to say life, liberty, property, most people would be like, if they have any like formal education, they'd be like, oh, that's John Locke. There was this idea that we know certain things. Cry havoc, let loose the dogs of war. Right. Most people be like, oh, that's Shakespeare, right? Nowadays, we do that for like 6, 7.
Yeah.
That's where we're so dumbed down to the point where our just thought process is taken up by the dumbest, shortest attention span things, where back then they were thinking about all of these deep philosophical subjects. And you think too about the preciousness of education. Nowadays, how many people skip education? How many people don't try? You go to college because it's the thing to do. You go to high school classes because that's the thing to do. And it's like, man, when Alexander Hamilton or when George Washington or when all of these founding fathers got together and they went to education, it was such a privilege. It's like, why would I miss out on this opportunity to be wiser?
And this kind of brings you up that we have a foreign exchange student living with us from Italy, and she's not really into history. And she asked me, why do I need to know it? I was like, because it's the application of wisdom. Yes, and I didn't phrase it as well as I should have now, and the way you phrased that I'm actually going to go back and talk about that, because she was talking about the sciences and all. Pure science in and of itself, I'm not saying it's not important. You should understand science.
But it's all critical thinking.
But it is critical thinking. But what I'm saying about that, if we want to talk about pure science just unadulterated science, I'm just going to go out and test a theory. Well, the Nazis did that in their camps. You just remove all morals and everything from it, because science in itself has to have some of those moral guardrails. But how do we get those moral guardrails? We get those through the historical text.
You're being well-rounded.
Well-rounded, but I'm saying when I say historical text, I'm going to include the Bible, for instance. It's an 100%. Historical text, but that gives us the basis of these morals because the lessons are passed down. Now, yes, when we're talking about religious text, we're obviously talking about passed down by God, but when we were talking about
one religion. But
what I'm saying is when you think about what the founders did, kind of circling back, they were passing down those moral lessons from historical instances. Say, I said Rome, right? Rome had our system of government with an exception. It did not have the judiciary that would check the other two branches. We have a third branch of government the ancient Rome didn't have. Why? Why did we add that? Because they read about what happened in Rome and were like, we need an extra pillar here. It's very simple of how this works. And so this application of wisdom is not the absence of science. It is because of it.
I'll implement some of my wisdom here. Looking back at, Rome, United States, looking back at the beginning of the United States and now, Patrick Henry really ranted and raved on how there was not enough clear guidance and guardrails and restrictions and definition on the executive branch, and that would end up biting us in the ass later on as a country. And he was absolutely correct. We needed to define some things more. But yeah, I think too, you said,
human. They weren't perfect.
But the other thing too is that we talked about the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the idea of the First Amendment too, in that time frame, is really taking these ideas and engaging in intense conversations about philosophy.
Yes.
How many people today engage in intense conversation about philosophy? just general philosophy of life, general philosophy of government, general philosophy of way, and we've gotten to a point even in our political system, we don't even talk about philosophy. It's just whatever they do with whatever letter is at the end of their name that's not the same letter at the end of the name of the people I like. I don't like. Like, we can't actually discuss policies
let's just take
and
tax
problems.
policy. There could be a philosophical discussion of tax policy, and the reason why is, I'm Mr. Taxation is theft, generally speaking, but our founders didn't actually fully agree with that because they did implement, like, property taxes was the requirement to vote, for instance. So there is I'm not saying this to say that I agree with all taxes. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that they clearly understood that there is some kind of philosophical discussion to be had here. Though I think one of the great, I don't want to say travesties, it's because, technology is what technology is at the time. But, nowadays we record everything. Man, just to have a recording of these debates and the Continental Congress ratifying the Constitution, or what was said. Because, we had the Constitution, we had the Bill of Rights, everything written down. That's correct. But what was written down is only a fraction of the discussions that they would have had. And man, if we could have just had that, that in and of itself, everything they discussed is probably deeper and more meaningful than any conversation we have had since then.
And I'm going to make this point, taxation is theft, but yes. I'm going to make this point. I think, too, that we forget so easily, and I really attest this to our free access to education. And I think that this relates really well to the gun industry, gun culture in the United States. Robert Kennedy said something I thought was really profound. We had the very tragic shooting here in Minnesota at the Annunciation School, and somebody kind of approached Robert Kennedy about, guns being maybe a mental health crisis or whatever. And he goes, guns are not the problem. We have always had more guns than we've had people. 1933, you could walk into a hardware store and get a fully automatic, Thompson submachine gun with a 50-round drum magazine. How many school shootings are going on back then, right? And I think that because we have access to all this education, and we're in this like super, almost a step ahead of a first world, right? Like we almost created this something above the first world. We think that we're above basic human problems, right? We think that we're above basic human problems because we all went to high school instead of only the people who worked really, really hard to go get their education, right? Like we think that because we make it a requirement that everybody, for the most part in the United States, although they do it poorly, can read, that somehow makes us smart instead of people who had to struggle to read, so they take reading more seriously, right? And we see this in the
you could make an argument too, we have turned around and made all this stuff free. And by I use free very loosely, obviously, because someone is paying for it, and that's you and I, John and Sarah, taxpayer, right? That's true. But what I mean is by making something free, you in nature degrade it. Like we just mentioned that, like, it's really impressive that these guys back in the 1700s, were able to assemble enough of an education to have a philosophical debate and understand and apply wisdom. That was such a struggle for them to do that it meant something. Like, by making things easy access, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And I'm going to actually give props to our parents here, for example. I think one of the things that, more than anything, that probably has driven you and me to be where we are in our lives today is the fact that our parents made us earn everything we have. And it could have been as simple as, I wanted the latest game system growing up, PS1, PS2. They wouldn't buy it for us. We had to go out and earn it. And it gave you that greater appreciation of what it was and what that meant, right? In the moment, you're just pitching a fit. I don't understand, the neighbors have it. But that's not degrading the neighbors' parenting by any stretch of the imagination, but it did instill that. Go earn it. And what you're mentioning, like reading and everything, I just think of, historically speaking, in the United States, that was one of the things that we literally used to enslave people, was we made them illiterate. They could not read for themselves. It was the very gateway.
And now we're to the point where we make people, they can't think for themselves.
Correct.
Right? So like you couldn't, back then it was you couldn't read for yourself. Now it's you can't think think for yourself.
So it puts you on that mental plantation in some ways of you're enslaved to something, whatever that is.
I think the other thing too that I was going to bring up when we talk about like the Continental Congress, like they were wise enough to go in and when they got to the stalemate, because they got to a very serious stalemate where everybody thought, we're going to fracture. This is it. And Benjamin Franklin comes in and he says, if a sparrow can't fall without the Almighty knowing, can a nation not rise without his aid? And then they break and they go for prayer, right? And that is so important.
That's coming from an agnostic.
That coming from an agnostic guy, like, hey, we need to take a second
Possible
to like
child murder.
Talk to the Almighty. Like that's pretty important, and we've lost pretty much all of that. Like we've lost that touch in a lot of ways, which is what led us to the point that we are today. But thank God that we did have the founding fathers to think of things like the Second Amendment so that we can maintain our autonomy. And ultimately, the goal of being an American is to be unconquerable. And what that means is not just from an invading force, but I should be unconquerable to any government force, whether it's my own or not, coming against me.
I mean, and America is the perfect continent. There's at least, speaking of the United States, is the perfect location where that has been borne out. Because just think, for instance, where we're sitting. Where are we sitting? We're sitting in New Prague, Minnesota right now. Outside, it is completely miserable. It is cold. It has been snowing all day, sleeting, and we're going to end up having negative 25-degree days. And that unconquerable spirit had people come from another location, maybe Georgia, somewhere else. They came up here without any aids and settled it. That takes a special. We talk about the pioneer spirit and that westward push as this. I mean, yes, it's a thing that happened, but we kind of whimsically talk about this, right? That there's these people who just pushed out west and they settled all this land. It's like, but when you look across the world, there's all parts of Africa where that hasn't happened. Why? It's that spirit. It's that spark. And I think it's fair to say that America may have lost a little bit of that spark recently.
Well, Europe has never had it, but no,
well,
I'm just kidding.
I mean, and
no, yeah, absolutely. And again, like, I mean, the pioneer spirit, sure.
But that's what it means to be American.
I mean more just like the mental idea of being not conquered by.
But I think that's what bore out the pioneer spirit. Is my point. Because,
yeah, definitely part.
Nothing's going to beat us. We're going to go do it. I mean,
but I just again like that.
That's why we went to the moon.
That's the important. We did not go to the moon. We're not gonna. We could do that on podcast 3.
Yes.
We did not go to the moon. Okay, the government is lying to you. I'm to the point where I've told you this before. If the government came out tomorrow and they were like, "The sky is blue," I would be like, "How is the sky not blue? And who are you giving money that benefits the blue sky people?" Like, my God. Anyways, that's another.
That's
another
time. That absolutely is something we should cover one day these days. Our favorite conspiracy theory.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's some firearms conspiracy theories that we could get into.
That's a teaser for our next episode. This is why you should
shooting.
Yeah, it's a big one. So we should definitely throw that as a teaser. This is why you should like, comment, subscribe, and
get into the comments and let us know what you guys think, what you want to.
And I think just let's do a little something fun for the audience. In the comments,
shave your eyebrows if we get 1 million views.
Yes, well, absolutely. So I'll do.
I'll shave my eyebrows if we get 1 million subscribers.
I will shave everything.
We'll rename this to the Eyebrowless Podcast. 1 million subscribers.
But I do think in lieu of the holiday season that we're coming up on, put in some of your favorite holiday traditions out there, or maybe it's a memory. It's one of the few times in our modern society, and I think I love this about especially America because we have Thanksgiving and we have Christmas and the way we celebrate it here. It's one of the few times that we intentionally slow down our lives, even if it's just for a day. A lot of times it's just for a day, and we remember. We talk about those stories. And what's even crazier to think about, and this is kind of a Thanksgiving plug, I guess, but we have intentionally slowed that down even more by taking away holiday shopping on Thanksgiving. It's like super anti-traditional American when you think about it. We're always thinking about how to sell more and more and more and be open more and more and more days. We've actually rolled that back. Almost the only time in American society I can think that that's true, at least in the modern world.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that, but maybe.
I mean, we've taken more time, or we've given the opportunity for more time, which is we live in a very fast-paced society.
See, I don't think so because I think because of things like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, like we actually force people to not spend as much time with their family.
But what I'm saying, yeah, I hear you on Black Friday, but they used to start that on Thanksgiving Day, and they have largely done away with a lot of that.
I don't know. I don't.
That's my
I don't
personal
support
opinion.
Black Friday or Cyber Monday. I know it's great for businesses, but it's just it makes people have to work when they should be spending time with
I mean,
family.
there's
And
some
I think it's
fairness to that.
healthier for the nation if we spend time. I guess Cyber Monday is fine. Like keep it Cyber Monday. Like let's get rid of Black Friday. I don't think there should be.
Right,
Black
and to
Friday.
be fair, I do think Black Friday is on its way out, at least in the way you and I know it.
I mean, shopping in person maybe a little bit, yeah.
Yeah,
But
but-
I mean, still people. I don't know. There's a ton of people. It's like the tradition.
And that's kind of a whole side subject. But getting back to the question for the audience, some of your favorite traditions, or maybe it's a dish, maybe it's a firearm, maybe it's a movie. Is there something that you guys did or a game growing up? And is there a memory associated with that? I'm always excited to hear about those things because we have, I mean, it probably drives the people who join our family crazy because we tell the same stories every year, but it is awesome to remember them. It really is. And, it gives you that touch to the past. I mean,
Remember the Alamo.
Yeah, we're always talking about historical stuff here. It gives you that connection to the past in the way that these things can do when it comes to your shooting experiences. But the holidays are great for that too.
Yeah, they are. And like you said, share, subscribe. Be sure to leave some comments. And I'll leave you with one iconic holiday line.
Let's do it. That worked out well.
I now have a machine gun.
Ho,
Ho, ho, ho.
Thanks, guys. Till next time. Cut.